Hello again, and thank you for joining me for our third lecture on the Middle Ages unit. Today we're going to discuss the rift that existed between the church and the kings, what led to these disagreements, and the various ways different rulers and popes dealt with the power struggles. As usual, please make sure that you have your Lecture 3 worksheet available and are jotting down the answers as we go through them. Please feel free to pause the video if you need to in order to get some answers, or even go back to review something you might have missed. And with that, let's get started. The power struggle of the church. So, here we are talking about Christianity and the early Middle Ages. As society withered and the fall of Rome in the late 400s, Christianity was a constant. Kings and rulers would come and go, but people's faith was unwavering. With the Emperor Constantine in 313 declaring the right of Christians to practice their religion without persecution from the government, the Christian religion became ever more popular. Hundreds of years later, the church would take advantage of the fact that the huge majority of people in Central Europe were Christian by holding that against the rulers. Popes and church leaders would be able to use this power vacuum in Europe as a way to expand the power of Christianity throughout the Middle Ages. During the Middle Ages, Christianity was spread by missionaries who risked their lives spreading Christianity. It also helped when Clovis was able to unite the Franks through the use of Christianity, and attacks by Muslims also spurred people to convert to Christianity. Now, in order to see how the church was able to hold on to so much power over the rulers, we must look at the structure of the church. The church had several different ranks of clergy or religious officials. Some were appointed by kings, others were appointed by a pope, who was the leader of the church and still is today. Looking at the flow chart, you can see here the breakdown of the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. At the top is the Pope. He is the one person chosen to represent God, and back then is the one to determine who goes to heaven and who doesn't. This guy you don't want to piss off. Underneath him are the cardinals, who have jobs of aiding the Pope as advisors, as well as a job of picking the next pope once the current one dies. As of January 2014, there were 199 cardinals. During the Middle Ages, there wouldn't have been nearly as many. Under the cardinals were the archbishops, who are in control of specific regions around the world. There are 32 archbishops in the United States, for example. Underneath each of these are bishops who are responsible for smaller areas throughout a region. There are about 177 bishops in the United States, 5 bishops being in Wisconsin. Finally, we have the actual priests, who are the ones that are in the church. As you can tell, this is a hierarchical or ladder-type system where all the decisions are made at the top, or the Pope, and they flow down to the priests who are closest to the people. Based on the chart, you can see that all the clergy, including the bishops and priests, fall under the Pope's authority. For the most part, local priests served as the main contact with the church. During these difficult times, there was much separation among the people around the different kingdoms. Every person was out for themselves and those who were in their small communities. However, Christianity was the one thing that allowed some sort of unity among the people. Let's take a look at how this happened. The system of feudalism created division among the people and the state, or the kingdom. However, it was the teachings of the church that bonded them together in a common understanding. The church provided people with a sense of security and belonging to a different kind of community, a religious community. The church priests and clergy administered sacraments, or religious ceremonies, that made people part of an organization they could understand, respect, and saw as never changing. Some of these sacraments include Christmas and Easter, and the confessions of people's sins. All of those who were Catholic Christians were subject to the canon, or church law. Let's talk a little bit about education back then. One thing that was lacking throughout the time period was formal education. Prior to the Middle Ages, education was available in many areas. However, during the Middle Ages, it was only the church that offered education. Monasteries were set up as religious communities for men where they could receive an education by religious clerics. Men were in monasteries and were called monks and gave their possessions up to devote a lifetime of serving God. Similarly, women would participate in being nuns and lived in convents. It was Saint Benedict, who lived from about 480 to 547, who wrote a book today known as The Rules of Benedict that outlines a practice or set of rules for monasteries. Interestingly, it was his twin sister, Scholastica, that did the same for convents. These rules are still used today in both monasteries and convents throughout the Western world. It was only time, though, before the Christian church discovered the desire or need to go beyond the role of focusing on religion. The Christian church was becoming secular and worldly, extending its influence into all aspects of life, especially politics. An example of this is when the church was becoming secular can be seen when Pope Gregory, between 590 and 640, used church revenues to raise armies, repair roads, and help the poor. These typically being primary political and social issues, not necessarily religious issues. Pope Gregory was so loved that upon his death he was declared a saint, a process today that doesn't occur until at least 5 years after their death, and other specific requirements that show a person's dedications and blessings from God. The church had sought to influence spiritual and political matters when it crowned Charlemagne as the Roman emperor in the year 800. Later on, it was Pope Gladius I who suggested that God had created two swords when it comes to leadership. One sword was religious, the power that was held by the Pope. The other sword was political, which was held by the emperor. This is basically saying that the Pope bows to control the Pope bows to the emperor in political matters, and the emperor bows to the Pope in spiritual matters. If each of these two authorities remained in their own area of responsibility, then the two would live in harmony and peace. Unfortunately, this separation of church and state didn't always occur, depending on who had the crown and who wore the tiara. A tiara is simply the headdress that the Pope would wear. Emperors clash with the Pope. As the church began to get involved in the political area during the Middle Ages, clashes would erupt between the Pope and the emperor. The church became unhappy with this, with something called the use of lay investitures. This is when the king appointed church officials. This occurred when the king would appoint church officials. This obviously would create a problem with the church, giving jobs to religious people politically instead of religiously. Pope Gregory VII banned lay investitures in 1070. But you can imagine, kings, for example, Henry IV, were furious with the Pope and demanded that he step down. As a counter-move, the Pope Gregory excommunicated Henry from the church, thereby taking away his rights of membership from the church. As a king losing support from the Pope, this would be catastrophic. Because of this, Henry approached Gregory for forgiveness and was forced to wait in the synod for 3 days before forgiveness was given. This act of the Pope further showed the power that the Pope had was much greater than that of the Germanic kings. The future kings, however, would attempt to exert power away from the papacy, or the Pope. These attempts would weaken the king and ultimately weaken the German provinces in Europe. The results. The results of the power religion had during the Middle Ages shows the power of the church grew. It was able to provide unity, education, and strong empires, even though the popes were allowed to abandon morality and call for a bloody event known as the Crusades. This concludes our lecture on the role Christian Church played during the Middle Ages. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know so we can get it answered for you quickly. Please feel free to replay this lecture if you need to, or to go over something you might have missed or need clarification. Thanks for watching, and stay awesome.